for a virtual coffee with the editor. Before I launch into what's happening with your extensions or expansions, depending on how you want to term it, I just wanted to wish Gautrain and the GMA a very happy 10th birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, 10 years. Can you believe it? Doesn't time just fly?
Well, I was there when the first bit of soil was turned, so it's a really long time.
2006, I remember that date. This is September 2006.
It's been absolutely amazing just watching it go from strength to strength, seeing it all in operation, which is kind of why, it's poignant to say what's happening with the expansions. Where the last I heard, we were still waiting for National Treasury to do its thing. So.
It always helps to just put this into context, right? Because a lot of people come up to me and say, when are you expanding to, and they name their suburb, right? And especially those on the West Rand who've got the worst congestion. So we've got to go back to 2014 when the then MEC of Roads and Transport, Dr. Vardy, got Jack van der Merwe to do an integrated transport master plan for Gauteng, taking a 25-year view on what the province is going to look like. It was a really interesting exercise because it didn't just look at rail, it looked at people movements, population growth, economic growth. Now, I'm going to summarize its conclusions as saying, if we don't do something dramatic, we are going to grind to a halt from a people movement point of view in this province. And road is not the answer. That classic thing, you've heard it so many times, we cannot build our way out of congestion with roads. So this ITMP 25, very solid document, had a chapter on rail. And it said, one of the interventions is we've got to expand our rail network. Because as you and all of your readers know, well, our current PRASA-owned network is coming on for 100 years old. It follows the reef. We all know the history that south of Joburg, follow the topography, that winding route through Irene to join Germiston and Pretoria, just doesn't cover where people now live and work. It's got to be expanded. So ITMP 25 then looked and said, where should it expand to? Where, if we look 25 years into the future, are people going to live and they're going to work? So it came up with that map, I'm going to call it the route map, of about another 150 kilometers of rail that are now needed to extend the existing rail network, be it PRASA or Gautrain, to cover the areas where we know people are going to live and work. So that as those developments happen, people don't buy cars and stick on roads, because that's the core of the problem. So we used that as the basis then, and the MEC came along and said, I've read ITMP 25, what's the next step? So we said the next step was to now do a proper feasibility study on the rail extensions. And we called it the Gauteng Rapid Rail Integrated Network Extensions. A hell of an acronym. In government, I think you have to invent an acronym, right? But the point of it was to say, this is agnostic about whether it's Gautrain or PRASA. This is where rail needs to go if we're going to have a chance of solving our transport problems in 2037. I must just pause there for a moment. ITMP 25 also calls for a lot of investment in BRT systems, in municipal bus systems, in minibus taxis. Minibus taxis are going to be the bulk carrier for the next 20 years. That's our reality. So it came up with this rail integrated with other parts of the solution. So what we did then was we took that quite broad picture and we did a very detailed feasibility study to have a look about which phase of these 150 kilometers should we do when. And that's where we came up that phase one, absolute no-brainer, was linking Sandton through Randburg, heading out into the West Rand, unserviced by rail, unserviced largely by BRT and buses. So it really is, it's a nightmare. It's people who live out there just get used to congested roads. So that was a very clear phase one that needed to be done. So even though our feasibility study looked at the whole 150 kilometers, we focused in on that first phase because we knew we couldn't go to Treasury and say, good news, we've got 150 kilometers of rail. We're going to need billions and billions of rands over the next 20 years. It just doesn't work like that. So we focused in on phase one, did very detailed demand studies, how many people would travel, and then looking at the specifics of station locations and the route of the rail. So that work, that feasibility study was finished, I remember 2017. So it's coming on for 3 years ago. And we went to Treasury. I mean, we consulted a whole lot of people. You know, I don't want to diminish in any way the massive consultation we did with the metros, PRASA, but the focus area was National Treasury and National Transport. And we went first to National Treasury and said, this is our application. We would like to do this as a public-private partnership. Exactly the same way as we did Gautrain, get in crowd and private sector expertise, funding, and that it would actually be a publicly owned asset, but privately developed and run, which I think has been a very successful model. And Treasury said, I'm going to summarize, they said, we like the idea, but you may have heard that our economy is not doing so well. Where's the money going to come from? I think was question number one. Question number two was, why are your fares what they are? Is there a possibility to reduce the fares and make this set of extensions more affordable, more accessible to users? So those were the two challenges that we were given. And we went back and we've done an enormous amount of work in both areas. The one which I'm more interested in talking to you guys about now, because I think it's a really interesting study, is how do you get funding from people other than government? You know, if you think about Gautrain, think back to that sod turning, Philippo, that you went to in Marlborough. And I bet you drove past Sandton on the way there. Was a dust bowl. It was an informal taxi rank. You remember the library was there, and go and have a look at Sandton Station now. I mean, there's more high-rise buildings around our Sandton Station than anywhere else. I'm going to say in Africa. Let me stick my neck out there and wait for someone to challenge me on that. But I know I won't be challenged because we've also done a study. We got Hatch along to come and do a study and look at developments around stations. And there's an absolutely astounding figure. 60% of all commercial and retail buildings in South Africa were built within 5 kilometers of a Gautrain station in the last 3 years. It's unbelievable. I mean, I'm talking Cape Town, Durban. That's the attraction that we've had. So how do we get some of the money which goes into those developments to actually help us build the railway system in the first place? So we've just in the final stages of finishing that study, and I must say it's looking very, very positive. It shows that we can actually shift a lot of the funding requirements away from government and onto either the private sector or individuals and people who benefit from being near stations. The term that's used is land value capture. The basic principle is if you build a station, people who live near that station or who own property near that station benefit. So the capture bit is to say, give us some of that benefit, we'll put that to building the station, and then you get the rest of the benefit. I think it's used widely around the world. So we're very excited that we've got a solution, at least a partial solution to the funding problem for this phase one of the extension. It goes back to Treasury in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We've been a bit delayed because of COVID-19. You can imagine trying to coordinate all of these things has been very difficult. But we think we go back with a very solid business case now. on top of the transport solution, to be able to say, this is a great investment opportunity for the private sector as well. It matches exactly what President Ramaphosa was saying when he launched the Strategic Infrastructure Development Program on Tuesday of this week. This concept of public and private sector working together. So for a long story, we're very excited. We have a sense that we're getting there finally.
You guys will soon be starting the consultation process. Is that public participation?
Let me explain that. In order to build, whether it's a road or a railway line, or even a pipeline, government's got to go through a very regulated process. You can't just pitch up one day and say, let's dig, right? We've got to go through a process where we start getting some rights over our routes. There's an act, it's called the Gautrain Transport Infrastructure Act, and that sets out the process whereby we as a government agency have got to go and do some work and define a 400-meter wide possible route. Then you've got to notify everyone who lives in that 400 meters because they have a big interest in this. Anyone who has some interest in where the route is, this is their opportunity to now engage with us. And I don't know if you remember, Philippa, but there was a very robust engagement on Gautrain back in the early 2000s. A lot of people vehemently opposed to it. It was kind of like, don't come near me. What's that? NIMBY, not in my backyard. We love rail, but not where I am. I think the attitude has changed a bit. I think we'll never get away from that. But I think a lot of people will also be quite positive about the project. So we're looking forward to, I think a very balanced and useful public consultation process on this first route.
How long is that process going to take? Because I recall the first round was quite long.
This is just a preliminary one. Maybe I must go through the whole process just to be clear on this. So this first step is that the MEC of Transport, Public Transport and Roads Infrastructure can publish in the Government Gazette that this is the likely route. That means that if anyone in that zone wants to rezone their properties, we get a say in it. And it just prevents anyone speculating on property. So you own a farm, you've got no plans to develop that farm, but you suddenly rezone it as high income residential, so that somewhere down the line you can cash in on this. Once that is done, we've then got to go and do the detailed design, and then the actual expropriation process starts. And that's a completely different ballgame. That's one-on-ones with property owners. What's the value of your property? And that's the process you're remembering from Gautrain 1. A lot of court cases, a lot of heat and noise, a lot of public media attention in that. And it all revolves around the money. We're not there yet. This is just about the route and where that route should go.
Once that's all mapped out, it then goes for funding, the final funding.
So it's a multitude of processes we've got to go through. Let's talk about the technical ones because they're always the easiest, right? So once the route is done, we then move into the final design stage. That's where we get a consulting team, advisory team that then does the rail and station designs in a lot of detail. All the environmental studies have got to be done then so that we know that technically this works. It's highly embarrassing to go through all of this and find there's a river you can't cross or something done. That final design has got to be done. Then on the commercial side, we've got to go and get the funding agreements from all the different players who we're looking to support us in this. And that's going to be quite a process as well. That will happen in parallel to the technical process. We've then got to go through the various government funding steps. Make no mistake, there is going to have to be public funds in this. We're going to have to go through the Treasury channels, National Department of Transport channels, and probably the new infrastructure office that's been set up in the presidency. So those three streams are going to have to happen in parallel, as well as, of course, the tendering process, right? Because we do need a PPP partner in this. So let's add that. That would then be a fourth stream of work that we'll be busy with.
Thumbsuck here. When do we turn the first soil?
Yeah, so that's exactly what everyone asks me all the time. And that's where COVID-19's got to come into it. You know, you would have heard the Minister of Finance's speech yesterday. Balance between, I think, very encouraging sounds, words on and he's allocated funding for that. But at the same time, he's saying we have to be very careful because we borrowed more money than we can repay. He was very clear. So somewhere between that balancing, we've got to fit in. Our view is that the country is in a slump. COVID-19 has happened. It's put a brake on a lot of things, but that it's a detour. We're going to get back onto our economic growth trajectory. We're going to get back on track with our population growth, our need for these rail extensions. We just don't know when. So if you know any bright economists, you can tell us exactly when things will come back to normal. Our estimate is that we're probably looking at 18 months added on to our initial process. So if I were to put my neck on the block and say, when would we turn the first sod? I would say early 2025.
The consultation process in terms of, going through your tendering process, I know your funding will be slightly different, so you might not be held to the same rules in terms of, state-owned funding and localization and designation. But I'm assuming that you will start looking at the capability of the local rail market from an investment perspective versus importing everything, what's left of our rail sector presently anyway.
Yeah, and listen, you can't sugarcoat it, hey? We've got to be worried. It's not just the rail sector, it's our construction capacity as well. We were incredibly lucky to be in 2010, 2006 to 2010, as part of that cycle. I don't think the construction industry had ever been stronger and more capacitated than it was. I mean, there were engineers coming back into South Africa in great numbers. And we've lost a lot of that. I think if you look at the balance sheets of the construction companies and who's still active, I think we've come down from 5 or 6 big players to probably 2 who are still hanging in there. So it's all very well for us to sit and say, yeah, local content, we'll set these thresholds, and all the benefits that will flow. We've got to be so careful to avoid the trap that you're pointing out, which is that we have these great ideas and we get to market and we find that we've only got international players. My response to this is that the Gautrain extensions aren't going to solve that problem. We've got to be part of a bigger picture here where government, and I think the president is announcing this, he's signaling very clearly, starts reinvesting in infrastructure and reinvesting in our own capacity to roll this out. On the rail side, though, there's 3 players, right? There's Transnet, PRASA, and Gautrain. So, and of those, obviously Transnet is by far the biggest player and investor in rail. PRASA's got to start investing very strongly in its network and revitalizing it. And we've got to fit in as another piece in that jigsaw puzzle. It can't be just any one of us doing our own thing and pretending that we can revitalize the rail industry in South Africa on its own. It's got to be planned. It's got to be coordinated. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting few years ahead of us.
Well, you mentioned a few key words there: planning and coordinated.
No, it's a challenge.
Talking about planned and coordinated infrastructure, procurement. How are you doing with your additional rolling stock. The last, first there was going to be new, then it was second hand, and then I think COVID.
It's still going on in the background. We lost those 5-6 weeks of level 5. And remember, our pre-owned market is overseas, and especially in the UK. And they had pretty much the same. But it is going on. The procurement is split into 2 parts. The one is of the pre-owned EMUs themselves, and those would be from owners in the UK. And then the second one is the local refurbishment and maintenance and additional assets that we would be doing here in South Africa. So the EMU tender went out, and the local refurbishment one is going out in the next few weeks. And we aim to close those tenders and have preferred bidders by November of this year.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something exciting
Yes, it is.
to consider for this year.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And then is there any other exciting news happening at the Gautrain?
We reopened, yay! But I can't describe to you the 2 emotions. The first, when we shut down for level 5, it was the first time that we didn't run any trains carrying passengers. We had 2 trains running just to check system integrity every day, you know. It was the saddest day of my professional career, it really was, to see the Gautrain going and parked in the depot. It was just devastating, you know. When we got the call that we would reopen at level 4, and the only rail system that I'm aware of in the world that was shut down and then allowed to reopen in early stages of relieving the lockdown, the happiest day. You know, it was fantastic. We've got this lovely video clip of the pantograph lifting and reconnecting. So it was fantastic. The Minister of Transport, Kilian Balula, came along. He was very impressed with our measures, the way that we put staff and our customer safety at the forefront. And we started running, and we've seen a pickup in numbers. We started those first days, I think, it was 2,000 passengers on the first day, you know. And we've seen a steady growth, but we're still nowhere near where we were pre-COVID. So our focus is really on attracting back our customers, our users, trying to get new markets going. I think people who have cars have retreated to them, unfortunately, given car use is the cancer in society. I hope all your readers agree with me, but there's a lot of people that we've been attracting who don't use cars, you know, so we want to reach out to them and rebuild our customer base over the next months.
Who would have thought? I never in my life expected anything like this, and it has had a profound impact on public transport, specifically rail, globally. The International Union of Rail and UITP and the likes have done some great research and events around the impact of COVID-19. I think my biggest concern in terms of Gautrain's next step and getting things going, do you believe that you're going to have a much easier run up to execution versus what the first launch was? Do you think that there's now faith in transport, public transport, and the brand Gautrain, and therefore you're not going to have the objections that came through so strongly right in the beginning of this dream? Of
course, you know, the fact that it's not a greenfields project or concept anymore. You know, we've proven a lot of doubters wrong, but other factors have changed as well. You know, if you think back to 2006, I tell everyone this nice thing about getting older. We ran a budget surplus for 3 years in a row. We were rich as a country. We could look and say, what are we going to invest in? That's turned around completely, you know. So on the one hand, yes, more proven concept, a lot more supporters than 2006, but much, much tougher economic times. You know, I have no doubt that if, you know, the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Finance, President, Premier sat in a room and you said to him, should we do the Gautrain extensions? They would say, absolutely yes. It's a no-brainer. Our economic impact is massive. Our transport impact is massive. But because they're responsible people, they would say, can we afford it? You know, and we can't back away from those challenges. You know, and that's why I kind of started out my introduction and explanation of where we are, is that we as Gautrain are not just being engineers coming along and saying, ministers and premiers, let's do this because it's a good project. Yeah, lekker, let's go for it. We're trying to go there and say, we know what the challenges are, and we trying to find solutions to those challenges. I don't know, it'd be interesting if you get Jack and I together and say, listen, who's got the tougher job? Jack in 2006 or William in 2020, we'll have an arm wrestle. Both are tough. I'll unequivocally, both are very, very tough jobs.
Sure. Well, I don't envy either of you in those particular circumstances.
It's fantastic. I love it. And I know Jack is incredibly envious of me as well. You know, it's a challenge that it's the right challenge. It's the right thing to do. We've just got to find a way of solving the problems. So there isn't a day when I don't wake up and think how excited I am about it. No need to worry. Rather just every night say your prayers. Hope that things turn our way.